At some point, they just stopped. Not all at once, gradually. Across many attempts and many disappointments. Across the specific accumulation of moments where they tried to explain what was happening inside them, and what came back was not what they needed. The misunderstanding. Minimizing. The advice when what they wanted was to be heard. The changing of the subject. The look that communicated, without words, that what they were sharing was too much, or too long, or too complicated for the person receiving it to fully hold. And they drew a conclusion. Not loudly. Not as a declaration. As a quiet adjustment to how they moved through the world. They stopped explaining. Not because they stopped feeling. Not because the interior life went quiet. Because they stopped believing that the explanation would arrive anywhere worth arriving. This is one of the most significant and least discussed psychological adaptations available to a person. And understanding it, understanding what it costs, what it protects, and what it takes to reverse, changes everything about how we understand the people who carry it. The pattern is not passive. It is not giving up in the general sense. It is the very specific conclusion that the labor of explanation, the enormous effort required to take something that is happening inside you and translate it into language that another person can receive and understand, is no longer worth the cost when the reception has consistently failed to justify it. To explain how you feel is to make yourself vulnerable. To do it repeatedly to people who do not receive it well is to make yourself vulnerable over and over without return. And at some point, the intelligence system says, enough. The risk is not worth what it produces. Psychologists studying emotional disclosure and its relationship to well-being have documented something that runs counter to the cultural narrative that says, sharing your feelings is always healthy. The health of emotional disclosure is almost entirely dependent on the quality of the reception. Sharing something real with someone who holds it well produces connection, relief, and a deepened sense of being known. Sharing something real with someone who holds it carelessly, who minimizes, dismisses, redirects, or responds with something that makes you feel worse for having shared, produces the opposite. It produces what researchers call failed validation, and over time, it teaches the person sharing that sharing itself is the problem. The person who stops explaining their feelings has almost always been a person who tried more than most, who brought their interior world to the people closest to them, repeatedly and with genuine hope, and received responses that did not match what the attempt deserved. And stopping is not failure. It is the intelligent conclusion of a person who has been paying close attention to what happens when they speak and what happens when they don't. Picture this. Someone you trust asks you how you are, and you feel, in the space of that question, the entire weight of everything that is actually happening inside you. The anxiety you've been carrying about the thing at work, the grief from the conversation last week that went wrong, the quiet worry about the relationship, the feeling you cannot name that has been sitting in your chest for 3 days. And you look at the person asking, and you calculate, automatically, and very quickly, whether what you could share would land safely there, whether the explanation would be received or redirected, whether the attempt would produce connection or the particular loneliness of having tried and not been met. And you say, I'm fine. Because somewhere in your history, I'm fine became the most efficient, available path through a situation that the longer answer had failed to improve. If this is landing somewhere real for you, take a moment to like the video. It helps more people find conversations like this one. And if finally having language for something you have been living without language for is something that matters to you, subscribing makes this work possible. Because several very specific things happen to a person over time when they stop explaining how they feel, and each of them deserves to be named clearly. The first is the development of a rich and largely private interior life. The feelings don't stop when the explaining stops. They go somewhere more interior, more fully private, more self-contained. And the person who stops sharing becomes, by necessity, someone who becomes very good at holding their own experience, who develops the capacity to sit with complexity without requiring it to be witnessed, who builds a relationship with their own interior that most people who freely share never need to develop. This is a real capacity, and it comes with real costs. The primary cost being that the interior becomes a territory that most people in their life never visit. The second is a heightened ability to read other people's sincerity. The person who has been burned by failed disclosures becomes, over time, extraordinarily accurate at assessing whether any given relationship can hold what they carry. They notice very quickly who redirects and who receives, who hears the words and who hears the feeling underneath the words, who can be with difficulty without trying to fix it or escape it. And the circle of people to whom they speak honestly becomes very small and very carefully maintained, not out of coldness, but out of the accumulated knowledge of what genuine reception requires and how rarely it is available. The third consequence is the specific grief of being surrounded by people who know you and don't know you at the same time. The person who has stopped explaining often appears, to everyone around them, entirely fine. They have become expert at presenting the version of themselves that requires no explanation, the functional, capable, apparently uncomplicated version. And they carry, beneath that presentation, everything that never made it out, the unexpressed feelings, the private assessments, the interior weather that goes unshared, not because it isn't real, but because the available containers have been learned to be insufficient. The fourth consequence is the difficulty accepting connection when it is genuinely offered, because the person who stopped explaining did so for good reasons. The reversal of that conclusion is not simple. When someone appears who is genuinely capable of receiving, who asks the real question and waits with real patience for the real answer, the person who learned to protect their interior often doesn't quite believe it. The offer feels unfamiliar. The trust required to accept it asks something of the nervous system that the nervous system has not been asked in a long time, and the capacity to receive genuine care atrophies in the same way any skill atrophies when it goes unpracticed. Here is the paradox that is perhaps most important to name. The person who stopped explaining their feelings is almost always the person with the richest and most complex emotional life in any room they occupy. The silence is not evidence of emotional simplicity. It is evidence of emotional depth that has not found a container large enough to hold it. What reads, from outside, as being closed off is, from inside, the permanent readiness to open held in check by a history of experiences that made the risk of opening feel greater than the reward. What changes this is not the encouragement to be more vulnerable. Encouragement to share, directed at someone who stopped sharing because sharing failed them, is one of the least useful interventions available. What changes is the specific, patient, consistent demonstration by another person that what is shared will be received, not fixed, not redirected, not held carelessly. Just received, I just met, just held, for long enough that the person inside the silence begins to believe that this time might be different. That evidence, accumulated over time, is what brings back what was never gone. The words were always there. They were simply waiting for somewhere safe to go. What made you stop explaining? And is there a person in your life now who makes you wonder whether it might be worth trying again? Hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.